Our values are what we put value on. I would, if you haven't had this conversation with your partner, I highly recommend you do it. And again, don't make it like a business negotiation. Make it fun. Bring some enrollment to it. Bring some livelihood to it, and make a game out of it. Whatever you can. Be creative. We're all creative.
All right, Rising Man family. Jetty Zuma here. We got Philip Gomez. We don't actually know who is hosting the show today because y'all know Phil Gomez by now. He's one of the founding fathers here, as am I. And here's the context. We started having a conversation about family values, and we realized, hey, this might be something really valuable to share with the family men out there and the other people who are thinking about what am I up to in my life, but also what is my family up to? So here we are, man. So why family values? Why did we decide that this is something that's important?
Yeah, man, I'm really grateful that one of us had the bright idea to record and start talking about this. That's probably me.
We won't say who. It was me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, man, but family values are a really important one. And I think it's interesting because it's something that I don't think you and I have ever specifically talked about.
Nope.
Even though we've spent a lot of quality time with each other's families and probably could rattle them off, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. But family values are really, they're just like the moral compass for your family. In men's work, we talk about your personal core values and the importance of each man having a code that they live by. And family values are no different than that, except they include another person, especially if you're with the mother of your children, right? So they include another person, and then they affect how a human being is being raised, right? So there's so much more to take into consideration. But they, just like your personal values, they're really the guiding light for how you navigate the difficult shit when it comes up.
See, that's the thing for me, because I know that's what's helped me in my personal values. When we talk about things like terms and my personal code, it's the thing that I can always fall back on when there's a difficult decision, because making difficult decisions, that's in the textbook of what it means to be a man. And if I don't have values, if I don't have that clarity, it can be difficult, can leave a lot of room for gray area and uncertainty and doubt. And particularly with a family, though, it gets even exponentially more difficult because there's other people involved. That I used to make decisions for myself, and sure, if it crashed and burned, it's just myself who has to deal with the consequences. But when it's a family and we're talking about raising children now and giving them the best of what we got, yeah, man, those values have been so important.
Yeah, man, stakes are way higher. And, it takes two to create a child. It takes more than two to raise a child, but, at least mom and dad are the most important, the first line of defense. So being on the same team is absolutely key. It's a huge transition in your relationship, right? Which is, one of the biggest things that we end up working on when it comes to fatherhood work. But now that your relationship is evolving, it's like all of your upbringings and your ways of viewing the world and really what you deem as important are going to be infused to what you do, what you say, and just really how you raise your children. So really getting on the same team there is essential, because if you're just operating under assumptions, you're not going to realize there's a leak in the ship until the storm comes. And that's not the time you want to realize you got a leaky ship. So really just having the conversation and just getting on the same page so you're not operating under assumptions is essential.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have we heard that story that, there's a mother and a father who are married and they're doing their best to raise children, and they come to a crossroads and they completely disagree on what's in the best interest for their child or children. And how many times has that led to a significant breakdown in the way the relationship has gone, right? The way that the relationship is unfolded. I just think about how many guys I've talked to who have a partner who doesn't match up with the way that they see they should be raising their children. And then before you know it, it's like, well, what are the alternatives? What can we do now? If not divorce and separate and part ways from this relationship, what else is there to do? Because a fundamental thing like a value is not something that you can just change overnight without compromising who you are or what you believe in centrally.
Absolutely. It's definitely not something that you can just up and change. We were talking a little bit before where I think we're hardwired to be attracted to people with similar values, whether we know it or not, probably part of the subconscious. But just the fact is, the society that we live in, it's really easy to get clouded on what we're focusing on. I know you dropped a Monday morning meditation talking about choosing your partner and just with all the influences of media and society and everything, our judgment can really get clouded, or we just start focusing on the wrong shit. But I really do think in our instinctual primal mind, we are looking for compatibility on a greater scale. So oftentimes we do find ourselves with someone that has a pretty like-minded way of seeing the world, or raising children. But again, you don't really know, because you're not going to find that out until the rubber hits the road, until you actually have a child that is going through a situation, or you have to correct your child for something, or you have to make a stand for something revolving around your children. So it really doesn't come out until then. But it really can be cleared with a simple conversation, or at least an opening of a conversation that can be a continuous conversation throughout the upbringing of your children, right? It's something you can revisit. I mean, I know you and your wife have had that conversation. Me and my wife have had that conversation. And I'm sure you've revisited it at least once. And for us, we haven't had a specific revisit, but it's about that time. My son is about to be 3. Going to school now, and there's more interaction with other children, with other parents, with just the world in general. So really it's kind of renewing our vows, not necessarily just to each other in love, but to the family as a whole.
Yeah right on. Well, Jeff King, thanks for joining us in here, man. Welcome to an impromptu recording of the Rising Man podcast.
Psyched to be here. I fell asleep hard putting Amara to bed.
I know nothing about that.
Woke up on the ground and I was like, I am very late.
Yeah. Well, guess what, man? It's a really cool opportunity because it's just the 3 of us. We don't think that anybody else is going to be jumping on. And we said, well, why don't we just record a podcast episode about what we want to talk about tonight? So there's a couple things we can do. We can scrap this recording and Phil and I can do this another time, or we can find a creative way to pull you into the conversation and you can be a guest on the podcast.
I'm up for whatever. I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah. What would be
let's make a pretend dial in, and then Jeff can just call in as a disgruntled father and and an avid hater of Jetty Azuma, and he can just start bad mouthing you.
Well, what do you think, man? I mean, I'll put it this way. For me, I'm here to be of most service to you and the men of this community. So,
I mean, I appreciate that conversation you were just having. I don't keep going. I'll jump in wherever I can.
Do you mind if we incorporate you into the conversation?
No, not at all.
All right, cool. All right, then here's what we're going to do. We're just going to rock with it.
Let's do it.
All right. So we've got a special guest who just jumped on the line unexpectedly. My man, Jeff King. Jeff King has been a member of the Rising Man community for, going on a couple of years now. He's also a father who's raising children, who has been in a relationship for a long period of time. And we're talking about this conversation about family values, Jeff. So Phil and I just weighed in a little bit. What do you think? First of all, do you have central family values that you operate from in the way that you raise your kids?
So, yeah, I think that's a pretty big missed conversation that was had between my former partner and I. Kind of things happened very quickly, and we didn't get to have that conversation ahead of time. Just kind of jumped all in. She had a 5-year-old at the time when we met, and just kind of hit the ground running. So I think it was a lot of kind of working backwards and still still adjusting on the fly. And yeah, we've been separated for a few months now, and that's been coming up even more kind of as we're kind of existing in these parallel spaces. And so for me, it's boiling down to just kind of compassion and listening, kind of communication as both a giving and a receiving. And that shows up, always in every interaction, whether it's with another person or even just when you're with yourself. So trying to instill that in both the kids as they're moving through.
Yeah, I hear that, man. Well, let's take a half a step back. So thank you for sharing your experience and your circumstances. I know that that's not an easy thing to try and navigate. And Phil and I were just about to talk about some of the consequences that can happen from not getting clear on these values and making sure that there's a match in values when we enter into partnership and raising children together. And I think you identified that pretty perfectly there as one of the things that was challenging for you and your former partner. So what have you learned from that, just about the importance of having that match in values, and how much do you think that's played into the challenges you guys had?
It's hard to say whether it's totally like for us, whether it's, I don't feel that we necessarily have different values, but it's more just kind of how they, I guess, kind of the road to get there. I don't know. I think it would have been very helpful to have kind of, I'm often very jealous of, or not jealous of, but encourage people before they're diving in to kind of have those conversations where it's, I did a total leap of faith and has had beautiful outcomes, but also very, very trying times. And I think that communicating upfront about, the path that you want to take in raising kids and having kids is pretty essential in terms of the partnership's longevity and the kids kind of being supported the best that they can be.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a conversation that it's not on the checklist of items that you have to do to get ready for partnership or to have kids, right? Like it's not something that we're led to or encouraged to do. At least that's not what was my parents never said, here's what you got to do when you find your partner. You got to sit down and make sure there's a match in values. And Phil, I thought it'd be good to hear you weigh in a little bit, man, about just the process of what that could look like. 'Cause I think there's a lot of guys out there who are in similar situations as Jeff and you and I too, when we didn't really know what we were doing when we fell upon that conversation of family values.
For sure. It's beautiful just how many intricacies there are in ending up being a dad. You could be like Jetty, who has had his whole life planned out since the age of 13, or, more of a guy like me. So I could relate a lot to your share, Jeff, because my wife and I, we were together for quite a while, but we weren't planning to have a kid at the time we had a kid. And although that had been the conversation of wanting to have a family together someday and all that, it just wasn't in the plan. So before I knew it, my partner was pregnant and I just went into freak out mode of I got to make more money, or I got to make sure everything is all together before this baby comes in 9 months. Definitely the first thought was not, let's make sure we're on the same page about how we want to raise this kid and our values being together. Where I think I really lucked out, or, whatever higher power was looking out for us, is both my partner and I had done a lot of personal development and personal work. And I think we just had a certain sense of clarity on our own values, which really lended itself to when we did finally have that conversation. So I think there's a certain level of clarity. And I mean, that was, 4 years ago, finding out that she was pregnant. And, I've grown a lot since then. A lot of things have changed, but those core values are pretty similar. So just like the nuts and bolts of it, like once my son was here, probably after the fourth trimester, where, it was like, okay, the baby's still alive. We're, everything's going okay. We're both stressed, but we're kind of out of that fourth trimester. I think the conversation just came up naturally in the sense of like, what do we want our family to look like? Not in the sense of how many kids do we want, but what do we just want our family to be like? And it kind of started in a little bit more playful, allowing ourselves to dream sort of thing, and kind of talking about this bigger picture, I guess, the vision. And from there, we were able to break down the things that were most important for us, or the things that would be considered our family values.
Was that a hard conversation to have? Was that like, what was the vibe? If we were sitting in the room with you when you were having that conversation, was it heated? Was it exciting? What was the vibe?
You know what? My partner, Demetra, is way better at being in the vision, dreamy flow state when it comes to those sorts of things. For me, it's really uncomfortable in that space because I'm like, yo, I'm thinking about what I have to do tomorrow and what needs to be done to like keep the ship afloat. It's hard to like roll out the map and just like, oh, it'd be beautiful, go here, go there. I'm like, let's make sure everything's plugged up and that we're navigating straight, this, and that. So it was more uncomfortable for me in the sense of giving myself permission to think big and not be limited by logistics. Really, really difficult for me. But once I was able to let go of that, it was a pretty lighthearted conversation because we weren't focused on the values themselves, right? Where I feel like getting the right word, or are we omitting things? Do we have everything? We really just talked about like what a day in the life would look like for our family in 10 years, and then kind of what would like a great day look like, and just thought about it from that sense. And then we were able to kind of backtrack. And for me, it made it a lot more enjoyable. Yeah. Less of a business transaction.
I was laughing there, dude, when you're describing your relationship with Demetra, because you're such a soldier, man. You're just like, dude, give me my marching orders, tell me which direction to go, and I'll knock down a brick wall for you. Which I love about you, man. It's good that you got a partner that supports that way of you. Yeah, man. For just reflecting on my experience, and I've shared this with you before, but it was actually incidental. It wasn't something that we intended for. It was date night. We got the grandparents to watch the kids, and we went to some, unremarkable restaurant, just out for dinner to spend some, time without the kids. And on the way there, I'll give credit to Carrie because it was probably her. She's smarter than I am. She said something like, "Hey, what are our family values?" Something along those lines. And neither of us had a clear answer. And we decided to devote the rest of our evening to discussing our family values. And speaking of the vibe, it was exciting. For us, we were totally into it. I was like, wow, I can't believe we had this blind spot. Because up to that point, we already had a 3-year-old son. This isn't like we'd been together for years at this point. But this was like, whoa, this is a really big blind spot. And one thing I would say is it was pretty clear that we were already living our lives according to the values that ended up coming out. For us, it was 3. It was service, spirit, and growth. And anybody who knew us at that point in time would look at us and say, oh, yeah, that's totally your family values. Now we just had it down on paper and we were clear on it. So there's that one part where maybe you're already living those values and it's just an opportunity to get clear on it. But the other thing was just to discuss what you were saying, Phil. How do we want our kids to be? If we fail everything else, but we do one thing right and we give our kids these strong values to at least serve as a foundation upon which they build their lives, what would that be? And it came down to these 3 for us. We're like, yeah, as long as we do that, as long as every decision we make nurtures their sense of service, of spirit, and growth in all the different ways that could be, then we'll feel like we got it done. And there's something about that simplicity that both of us really liked. I know simplicity tends to be more of a masculine thing, but I remember Carrie on the way out, we were like skipping, man. I can remember it now. We were like skipping back to the car, like we had accomplished something really big. And yeah, man, I can still remember that experience. I told you I had Carrie created this picture where she put those 3 values over a picture of us with Sitka, and it was my screensaver for like a year, and just really reinforced that every day, all the decisions that we made. So it can be an exciting process. I think that's probably the best case scenario, that it's not some sort of battle that you're fighting over territory here with your partner. It's one of the few places that we really get to collaborate on vision, because especially in a men's space, I do that so much for myself. And I would say it also sparked our bigger discussions of, okay, great. Now, how do we make all the other things that we say we want to happen in our lives?
Yeah, I love that. I was just going to say that's kind of like you guys join really nicely there, in that you're both kind of looking back, and it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of like, kind of going, Phil going to that dreamy state and trying to envision where you want to be. And then also kind of Jetty looking and identifying kind of where you are, and kind of having those meet. That's really cool. Those are 2 really nice takes.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So Jeff, let's come back to you for a minute, because now Phil and I kind of shared our experience of that, and going back to what you said earlier about never having had that conversation with your former partner. What if you look at the way that you raise your kids? Let's just focus on you for a minute. Would you say that the values that you want to impart in them and instill in them come through in the way that you're raising them?
I hope so. I think I certainly hope so. I think that, yeah, I think part of something that's coming up for me in this conversation as well is like, I'm just kind of I'm a slow processor. And I think that when kind of all of a sudden I was like going light speed into dad mode, it really, I definitely like soldiered up and was like looking at things in a way I never really had before, in terms of, finances, and just tightening down everything I could, for the storm that was coming and was already in. It's like, and as like an artist and a musician, I'm often in that flowy state and head in the clouds, and very often, and not very often, like figuring out logistically how they do, how things are done. It's more, that's much further down the line, again, just like in the process for me. So that was a hard thing for me. So in terms of bringing it back to the kids, is it's like trying to instill in them that space, and allow them that space to have their head in the clouds, and then kind of trying to bring them down to, how are you going to get that done? Or, my daughter will make like these lists of like what her Saturday is going to look like. And it's just like, she's going into first grade now. So like, the bullet points are just getting longer and longer, and each one of those bullet points is getting longer and longer. And it's like, all right, this is awesome. Like, you have this huge day planned. Like, how are we going to get it done? Like, let's get it done.
Wait a second. You say your daughter's going into first grade, and she plans out her Saturdays the way she wants them to go, and she makes like an agenda for herself.
It's bananas, man. It's like,
dude, we gotta hire her for Rising Man, because I know how to get like middle-aged men to do that.
We need to hire her for me. Yeah, it's like, I end up just like going to her day. I'm like, all right, yeah, bench clear on my plan. Like, let's do it. It's really fun. But yeah, like in terms of, yeah, it's like this odd, and I think, and just, I mean, back to the values conversation, it's like the value of just like allowing your space, yourself to have that creative space, while also balancing it with, things that need to get done. My favorite part is on those lists are always the meals, and go to bed is last. So it's like, and she does that on her own. Like, that's like, she has her targets. It's really fun.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Something that came up in hearing you share that is how having family values is, it's almost like a way of determining what success would be, right? For it's like setting goals for yourself, right? So if you're, some of our values are like fun and adventure, respect, reverence, and unconditional love, right? So it's like if I can instill, if the on my son's 18th birthday, if I can look at the man that he is and he's exhibiting those things without me prompting or without me, just by himself, like I would be like, I did a good fucking job. Doesn't matter if he's going to college or not going to college. Doesn't matter if he's, a musician or a surgeon, right? Like it doesn't, none of that, nothing else matters, right? So I think it's a really effective way of honing in, simplifying what we want to focus on as a parent and what is then the measure of, did we do a good job or not, right? And of course we don't have control over everything, but if we can focus on that, we're not focused on making sure our kids are some specific trade or doing a specific thing with their life, but that we're just focused on them being a good person.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think that's another place where a lot of people go wrong, is focusing in so much on the results that they lose sight of the value that it's actually connected to. Where if I just want my son to be respectful and show unconditional love to himself and others, then it doesn't matter what he's doing. Like you said, right? It doesn't matter if he's going to college. It doesn't matter what he's doing with his life. I just care about you being this type of human being. And when you really get a parent and you and you can kind of separate them from the chaos of day-to-day life of just trying to make ends meet and make it all happen, and you sit them down and you really ask them, well, what really matters? When at the end of the day, what are you really helping to raise your children to become? I think everyone would at some point, they just say something along the lines of just be a good person, right? Just be a good person. And I think that's what the values come down to. It's like, well, what are the qualities or characteristics that we've prioritized in order to be the type of person that we want to see after us? Because that's another piece of the conversation here is legacy, right? God willing, my kids are going to outlive me. So what do I want to ensure is on the planet after me? I definitely want to have more humans that are service spirit and growth oriented, right? Starting with my two children. That sounds good to me. I think they'll be able to handle more of the challenges that they'll face individually and collectively as a generation if they are that way. So I think it's also a really good opportunity to simplify things and not get so caught up in the specifics and the check marks. And my kid's got to be an expert cellist and captain of the soccer team so they can get a full ride to college and have better opportunity in their lives. No, I mean, how many people out there scrapped all of that and became who they were going to be anyway? In spite of the results, they just but the person inside of them, I guess their essence shine through. That's what I think about when I think of values. It's like, well, what is the essential part of you that we could apply anywhere?
That's really good. The other thing that values brings up for me, because we're always talking about relationship, whether it's in Dads on Purpose or Father to Father, it just always comes up. Difficulties in relationship or just like the push and pull that's happening there. So I think when you are able to come to an agreed upon value together, it allows for more freedom in the way that, or in the difference between how I father and Demetra mothers, if that makes sense. So there a lot of breakdown occurs because maybe I don't like, or dad doesn't like how mom does something, right? Or vice versa. But if we both have this agreement of the overall importance being instilling fun and adventure, right? Then if mom wants to make sure we schedule 1 week vacation every year, and I want to focus on my kids, stimulating my kids' curiosity and just just desire for new experience and knowledge and things like that, then, we're both working towards the same goal. It doesn't matter if it looks different how you do it versus how I do it. Like, we can always come back to that thing that we agreed upon. So I think the values will allow for that, the difference in parenting, because you're still tied to that buoy, to that one anchor point.
Yeah. And I think it also keeps me from making it all about me too, which I know is a really easy thing to do in this day and age. And having that central thing that we're both subscribed to, and that we enroll our children as a whole family. It's that thing that we all get to be in service to. And some of those decisions, like you were saying, it helps me remove myself and my personal interests from the conversation. If I'm really honoring those values, if I'm really honoring the spirit of adventure or service or whatever that value is that we want to identify, then I almost have to. If I'm going to be honest with myself, I have to take myself out of that equation and just look at, okay, well, what's best for the family here? And I'll tell you what, sometimes it's hard for me to arrive at that clarity of that question. Like, what is the best for the family? So many times I'm operating from, yeah, okay, well, how's this going to benefit the family? But really, what's best for me? What's the best way for me to take care of my family? And yeah, I just think it's a really great reminder to have that.
So I guess my question to you is, how do you navigate that distinction?
Well, like I said before, having that reminder to look at those family values, that was really helpful. I can remember a couple of key moments where I had to make a decision with Carrie, or even just for myself, of how I wanted to conduct myself. And I saw that screensaver pop up: service, spirit, and growth. Picture of me, Carrie, and my son at the time, because Itzy wasn't born yet. And it just kind of, it's that thing that snaps the coherence. It's having that reminder. So that's one of the ways. Having other people who I've proclaimed my values to, right? Like other people that I tell them, the things that I value in my life are these things, so that if I'm making decisions that are outside of them, people can say, huh, that's interesting. That doesn't seem very service oriented. That thing you did there, didn't sound like that was coming from a growth mindset. So I guess it also requires having people who, like we always say, having people who call me on my bullshit and let me know when I'm slipping into that space of making it about me, or doing the easier thing, or following the path of least resistance. Because ultimately, that's not who I want to be. Yeah. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, what was just coming up for me was I haven't had a lot of like peer dad friends, and that was one thing that got me, more involved with you all, between Dads on Purpose and Father to Father. And I recently started a job at a middle school at a very wealthy community, and so much. It's given me so much perspective in terms of not getting, I've gotten to know some parents, but really just dealing with this, now hundreds of kids, and seeing how the parenting is coming through them in a way. It really highlights exactly what you're talking about, which is when something is clearly being done for the parents' sake as opposed to the kid's sake. And as the educator, it's very easy to pick up on that. Even as a new educator in this sense, just working with a large volume of kids. So I think that's helped me come back to that. It's very much do I want my daughter taking piano lessons, or is she excited to take piano lessons? And is it about hitting your marks, in whatever it is you're doing, or is it about that process? And again, as she's getting older, it's she's doing more and more and having more and more interests. And it comes back to exactly what you're saying, is it's you can go about it any way, but it doesn't matter what they're doing at the end of the day, if they're a good person and those values are coming through, and it's how they're doing whatever it is they're doing. That's definitely the most important.
Yeah, that's such a unique take on it, man. I'm glad that you shared that. Just seeing so many families, and you probably get a better opportunity to look at this than Phil and I, but you definitely do. And you definitely do, because you're seeing so many children that you have a close and intimate relationship with as a teacher. And then seeing the families. And I'm actually in an opportunity right now where I'm leading a rites of passage class with some homeschoolers, and I'm in that position all over again. I'm like, whoa, you see the dynamics of the family, and it's easy to see through, and exactly what you said, how much of these decisions is based on either what's actually best for the parents, or what's easiest for the parents, or what's the easiest way for you to kind of hold your breath and get through being a parent until this kid can go off on their own. Sometimes I'll just call it what it is. Sometimes that's what it looks like. Sometimes I'm in that place too. I'm like, damn, I'm just trying to get my kids out of the house. I'm just trying to get through this, because it's a lot to be a parent. And it's hard to be, I think, to be a values driven parent who's really making those decisions for your family based off of those things. That's definitely the harder path. I'd say it's definitely the path that has more resistance to it. But what it comes down to for me is, at the end of the day, I never want to feel like I'll have to look my kids in the face and tell them that I didn't do my best, that I don't ever want to tell my son, hey, sorry about that. I took the easier road there. I didn't fight harder for you when you were younger. I didn't fight harder for your mom or for your sister. I just never want to have that moment. And I think some people don't even realize that that's what they're setting themselves up for by making some of these choices.
I think that definitely hits home. Would definitely never want to have that conversation with my son or my daughter. I think there's an element of doing your best, which I have a really hard time with that, because like I have a pretty strong self-critic, so it could always be better. But I think really just sticking to my guns as far as the values go, right? Just like if we've made time, my partner and I have made time to talk about those things being that important, then just like really making sure that I live up to those, right? So if one of our values is reverence and respect, like I don't ever want to model the opposite of that for my son, cursing up a storm and throwing stuff and just like, making an ass out of myself because someone upset me. That's like the first thing that comes to my mind. And being human, that might happen, right? But I also want to be the father that has that conversation with him. Hey, daddy messed up. That wasn't right. I want to bring him with me to apologize to that person. Like there's the, not so much the strive for perfection as it's really the honor and impeccability and courage, which all of those are my personal core values. So really being able to just stay true to all of the values that I've deemed important, and really being able to, at the end of the day, whatever, in 18 years, 20 years, 50 years, I can be like, I held true to that.
Yes, that's the other thing I love about it, is it makes it so simple. It really simplifies parenthood, because if I've got my values, then it's basically like I've got my GPS coordinates, right, of how to get through this journey of parenthood. And for example, one of our family values is spirit. And so even if I'm not upholding that value, or the times in my life where I feel a bit distant or removed from my own spiritual path, or I've gotten so caught up in other areas of my life that I forgot about it for a while, it also gives me an opportunity to show my kids what finding a pathway back looks like, which I think is also really important with values, because we can write our values down. We can put them on our screensavers on our phone all day long. But at some point, like you said, Phil, there's going to be that fall from grace moment. Like, oh, damn, I slipped. Something got in the way. My emotions overcame me, or I got distracted. I lost focus. To be able to demonstrate to our kids that there's always a pathway back. And here's what it looks like. I love what you said there, Phil. Like if I fall out of respect or reverence, that I'm going to bring my son with me and let him see me apologize and make right on that. If I fall off of my spiritual path, I'm going to own it. I'm going to articulate what I'm experiencing to my kids as I'm doing it, so that we don't set them up to to have to live up to these fantasy standards that just aren't real, right? The more visibility we have on that, I think, is the more honesty that we bring to it. Ultimately, I think it serves our kids better.
Yeah, that's huge. It's like, yeah, again, it's just all about that process. And it's, again, it's, Phil, like you mentioned, like you have a hard time, like, doing your best, but it's almost like if you flip it and reframe it as, this Kobe Bryant quote is coming up for me. It's like, not like failure doesn't exist. That's just in your mind. And the idea being that, like, if you don't achieve something, then you try again tomorrow. You learn from that. You try it again tomorrow. And if you miss it again, you try it again the next day. And it's that idea of, kind of flipping it as to you're doing your best is then not allowing the failure, or that even idea of failure. It's more just kind of coming back from that and just continually trying to adapt. And what comes up for me there is like the necessity for teaching ourselves and allowing ourselves, and teaching our kids and allowing them to have the time to observe themselves and figure that out as early as possible. And again, like coming from this school environment, this middle school, it's like, these kids aren't observing themselves at all. It's like, they're not supposed to have their phones, and they're just like cracking out on their phones all the time, and they have no idea they're even doing it. So it's like, it's not wanting to make the assumption that that's what's happening at home, but it's just like, again, living it myself, it's so easy to just be able to, screen time is just such an easy way to get your kids occupied, or, give yourself that escape where it's like both of you are getting removed. And then all of a sudden it's like your kids in class, like just on their phone or their computer, like zoning out, like they have no idea. It's a lot.
Yeah, dude.
Man,
go ahead.
I love that, because the word that comes up for me is, or words, is unspoken values, right? Like, what are we teaching our children about our values when, that we haven't planned for, right? So I'll just be completely transparent, open and honest. My 10-month-old daughter is like constantly trying to get my phone wherever it is. And that is because she sees me on my phone so fucking often. That's like straight up, like taking ownership and being like, yeah, that is because, like, when I need a little break and she's like kind of occupied with something, I'll look at my phone. She looks up and sees me on my phone. So she's like, wow, that thing's got to be pretty awesome. Let me go get it. And, so just this unspoken values, what are the things that our kids are learning just from watching, observing, because they always are. So like, what are we modeling for them? And I think it's really, it's a reflection we can always make. I can always make, especially in just observing my kids. Like, okay, how did they learn that from me, or how am I modeling that to them? And I think the other thing when it comes to family values is a fun game you can play with other dads, especially ones that know you well, is like, could tell me what my top 3 family values are just from observing my family. And I think that could be pretty revealing too. It's like, is that in alignment with what I think are the values, or is something else coming up there? So just like kind of a way to make some fun out of it, but also just get some feedback.
I'm glad we got to this point, because a huge insight bomb just dropped in for me. Just even looking at the word value, right? We talk about values as though there's this list of values that I have, but it's really just, what do we put value on? Right? What do I value? And like you said there, Phil, like if our kids are watching us, they see what we value. Oh yeah, daddy values his phone, right? Or daddy values spending time outside chopping wood. It's right there. It's all in the way that we live. It's not, it's has nothing to do with what we say or what we put down on paper, but it's what we embody. And you beat me to the front of the line, man. I was gonna out myself too, because I've done the same thing, man. This day and age, it's so easy to model for our kids the value of screens and technology. And for me, in large part, it's often an escape. Yes, it's a function, it's a tool, it's something that we use, it's useful. But a lot of times for me, it's an escape. And my wife calls me out on it too. She calls both of us out on it, not just me, but she calls me out on it. And the question is, am I willing to deal with my own discomforts now so that I don't reinforce that value so much with my children that they have to unlearn that they have to unwind themselves from it? Am I willing to deal with the things that cause me to run to my phone and check the sports scores and look at news headlines now so that they don't do that? And right now it's like 50-50, you know, like by my actions on a good day, you know, I'm winning the battle. But that's really what it comes down to, man. That's the crux of the conversation. That I think that's the mirror we all get to look at is, am I willing to do the hard thing now so that my kids won't have to deal with that same hard thing? Otherwise, we're just passing the buck on down the line.
Yeah, there's so much around presence and mindfulness and, you know, so much being, I mean, in the best case, so much conversation around getting that in the classroom and the schools. And yeah, again, it's just like, yeah, it can be all talk. But if you're just, you know, your teacher's looking at their phone after they're telling everyone to put it in their bags, or your parents are telling you, are on their phones, you know, after telling you you've got, you know, you've reached your screen time limit for the day or whatever it is, you know, it's just like, I think that's one big takeaway for me in the last few months is really just trying to be present for the kids at school in a way that I want to demonstrate for them is possible. You know, you can go through a 40-minute block of time without needing to look at your phone, and same thing at home. It's, you know, that was part of the reason, you know, I was late this evening was I left my phone down and I was being very present at bedtime for my daughter, and so present that I fell asleep.
Well,
that's embodiment at its finest.
Yeah, right. I've arrived.
Yeah, that's game. That's spinning a story with some context. I love it, Jeff, and I'm glad that you jumped in when you did, man. Before we start to wrap it up here, any final angles here? Anything that we haven't said about values that you guys want to drop in before we tighten it up?
I really think you put it quite poignantly in that our values are what we put value on. I would, if you haven't had this conversation with your partner, I highly recommend you do it. And again, don't make it like a business negotiation, make it fun, you know, bring some enrollment to it, bring some livelihood to it, and make a game out of it. Whatever you can, be creative. We're all creative. So yeah, it doesn't have to be like another finances conversation, which is also very important, but really bringing some livelihood and just some zest to it so that you can at least begin the process of being on the same team, you know, fully, and really having the same goal. Yeah, that's the biggest thing I got to put out there. If you haven't had the conversation, have it.
Yeah. How about you, Jeff? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I love what Phil just said, and just adding on to it. I mean, part of the beauty of if you can achieve making it fun, and that you get to keep it fluid and get to keep it coming back to it and checking in on it, and that doesn't become a chore or a finance conversation, but more something you're excited to do. You know, how have we lined up this month or this week, or how are we in line today? It's almost like a fun target you get to hit or check in and see if you hit.
Yeah. I love it, man.
And if communication is one of those values, then that's also serving that function, is you're communicating about that.
Yeah. Well, some real dads, some real talk, swapping notes and trying to keep our boats afloat. That's what we're doing here, guys. And really enjoyed this dialogue with you guys here tonight. Thank you guys for sharing your hearts and sharing especially you, Jeff, man, coming in here and just sharing what's the journey of another dad here. What does it look like? And to know you and to know that you're a father out there who's doing his best to impart those values into his children, and that you also do that as an educator, man. Just really want to acknowledge you for that and the way that you carry that forward.
Thank you.